Rainwater pattered against the window glass, chilling to the bone. I opened my eyes, and my vision, which had been blurry, grew clear. Before me was not the moldy, despairing rented room, nor the suffocating debt collection noise. The electronic calendar on the desk showed the time, October 14, 2024, 11:40 p.m. On this day in a previous life, too, it was a stormy night like this. At that time, my phone violently vibrated at 11:45 p.m. On the other end of the line, my cousin Chloe spoke with a sob and fear, saying she had lost her way on the cliffs of Black Stone Mountain in the suburbs, her ankle hurt, surrounded by wild dogs, and she begged me to drive the car from the planning project to pick her up alone and not tell anyone. Out of sisterly solidarity, I didn't think much and rushed out into the rain. However, when I arrived at the scene, what awaited me wasn't a frightened cousin, but a premeditated trap. Chloe cut the anti-slip rope herself and fell backward off the cliff, while in the shadows of the woods, Aunt Sarah, who had been filming, held an edited video and the traces erased on the spot, branding the crime of murdering one's own sister squarely on me. After that, Chloe narrowly survived with her life but became a vegetable. Sarah took away all our family assets as compensation, my parents died one after another in depression and despair, and I too died miserably from torment in prison and online violence. Ding, the phone screen on the desk suddenly lit up. The screen showed a familiar name, Chloe. The time was precisely 11:45 p.m. I looked coldly at the glowing screen. The phone ring in the quiet room was unusually sharp, one ring after another, as if urging death. The name on the screen kept flashing, carrying the endless calculation and greed from my previous life. I did not reach out to answer. I didn't even leave it a sliver of vibration. I raised my hand, pressed and held the power button on the side, pressed and clicked to shut down. The screen went black in an instant, and the whole room returned to a deathly silence. After turning off the phone, I walked to the desk, opened the computer. I pulled out from the drawer a brand new, unopened high-definition camera, connected the power, fixed it in the corner of the desk, the lens facing my desk and the room door. Next, I opened the official online course platform on the computer and logged into the legal profession qualification examination system I had registered for. The system automatically recorded my login IP address, real-time facial recognition verification, and a timestamp precise to the second. I put on the headset and began to listen to the lesson and take notes seriously in front of the camera. The sound of the mouse clicks, the turning of the pages, the progress bar scrolling endlessly on the computer screen, all of it was clearly recorded by the camera. The night grew deeper, the rain outside grew heavier, and the wind roared, beating the leaves against the window frame with a mournful wail. I sat under the desk lamp, my pen never stopping. I knew that several kilometers away on the cliff edge of Black Stone Mountain, another grand show was unfolding at this moment. Without my hurried arrival, without me as the designated scapegoat, the stage that had been tailor-made for me now only had Chloe herself. The rain would wash away all traces on the mountain path, and a turned-off phone would be my strongest defense. 3:00 a.m. I completed a full set of online test questions and submitted the answer sheet. The system automatically generated an electronic certificate with a time zone signature and certification from the National Time Service Center. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain outside had gradually eased, and the sky took on an oppressive, dull gray. I encrypted and packaged the video file of the entire recording just now, uploaded it to 3 independent cloud servers, and backed it up on a portable encrypted USB drive, placing it in a fireproof safe. After finishing all this, I sat back down beside the bed. At 6:30 in the morning, sunlight pierced through the thin fog and entered the room. I opened my eyes on time, cleaned up, and put on a sharp, plain outfit. Then I walked to the desk, pressed the power button on my phone. With the startup chime, as soon as the screen lit up, countless missed calls and text notifications exploded onto the screen, the system sound stinged, and they kept ringing for a full half-minute before finally stopping. Dozens of missed calls, all from Chloe and Aunt Sarah. The last message came at 1:40 a.m. From Sarah, and the wording was full of frantic questions. Elena. Where the hell did you go? Why did you turn off your phone? Read this message and call me back immediately. I looked at those jumping words and a cold, emotionless smile rose at the corner of my mouth. I didn't reply to any message, instead I silenced the phone and put it in my pocket. Then I opened the door, walked straight to the kitchen, and started preparing breakfast for myself and my parents. The frying eggs sizzled in the pan, and the scent of toast filled the air. In the previous life, this morning marked the beginning of my parents' despair and pain. In this life, I would keep every storm outside the door. At 7 o'clock sharp, a loud, violent banging came from outside the door. Bam! 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 The iron door banged loudly, accompanied by Sarah's hysterical screams. Elena! Open the door! Get out here! You wicked little bitch! My parents were awakened, stumbling out of the bedroom in their pajamas, faces full of fear and confusion. I patted my mother's hand to reassure them, then walked calmly to open the door. As soon as the door opened, Sarah charged in like a maniacal beast, eyes bloodshot, hair in disarray, clothes still speckled with last night's rain and mud. She was followed by my aunt's husband Mark and 2 uniformed district officers. Sarah rushed in, raised her hand, and slammed it toward my face, screaming, "Is it you? What did you do to Chloe last night? Why did you turn off your phone?" I stepped aside to avoid her palm, then grabbed her wrist and pushed her away coldly, and, coming into my home early in the morning with the police and laying a hand on me, "This is your parenting? You stop acting all high and mighty." Sarah roared hysterically, tears and mucus mixing together. "Chloe disappeared last night. She said she would look for you after 11, and after that she could not be reached at all. Just now the rescue team found her bag at the bottom of a cliff under Blackstone Mountain. Her last call record shows she was calling you. Why did you turn off your phone? Did you lure her up the mountain and push her off?" Hearing about Blackstone Mountain, the disappearance, my parents' faces changed dramatically, and they hurried forward to ask what was going on. The 2 officers approached with solemn expressions and presented their credentials. "Ms. Elena, please cooperate with the investigation." According to the call records provided by Mrs. Sarah, at 11:45 p.m. Yesterday, Chloe, the missing person, repeatedly called your phone 3 times. Where were you last night? Why didn't you answer? Faced with the officer's scrutiny and Sarah's murderous gaze, I did not show a trace of alarm. "Officer, after 11:30 last night, I was in my room studying for the legal professional qualification exam," I replied calmly. "As for turning off the phone, I enable a scheduled night shutdown every night at 11:30 to avoid midnight disturbances. This is clearly recorded in my phone's history and can be verified at any time." "You're lying!" Sarah screamed. "You don't have a habit of shutting down late at night at all. You're doing this on purpose. You surely know Chloe was in danger on the mountain, and you intentionally powered off to let her die." And I turned my head, gazing at her coldly. "First, Blackstone Mountain is more than 20 kilometers from my home. It rained heavily last night, and I'm a girl with no off-road experience at all. How could I run to the mountains in a heavy rainstorm? Second, Chloe is an adult. She went to a desolate cliff in the middle of the night without calling the police, and instead called me. That in itself is illogical. If I don't answer the phone, does that mean I'm the culprit?" The 2 officers exchanged a look, evidently finding my logic very clear. One of the older officers said, "Ms. Elena, to rule you out as a suspect, we need to verify your alibi from last night." "Of course, I'm happy to cooperate." I walked to the desk, opened the computer, and pulled up last night's surveillance footage, the answer records certified by the National Timekeeping Center, and the back-end data logs of the online learning platform. This is high-definition surveillance video from my room, with a clock watermark, recording the entire period from 10 o'clock last night to early this morning. I turned the screen toward the officer. "This is my late-night practice record on the law exam system. The submission time was exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, and every question has a system's second-level operation log. If you don't believe it, you can contact the platform to retrieve IP login verifications. The officer carefully examined the video and electronic evidence. His brows relaxed slightly. The video shows no editing marks, and the back-end logs are very complete. From the evidence chain, Ms. Elena indeed stayed at home the entire time last night and did not have time to commit the crime. Sarah looked at the evidence on the computer screen. Her face turned pale in an instant, but she still pressed forward to shove the computer. Impossible. This is forged. You despicable, vicious woman. You've harmed Chloe. Officers, you can't believe her. She must have colluded with outsiders to harm Chloe. Mark also chimed in from the side, his face grim as he threatened, Elena, if anything happens to Chloe, our family won't let you go. Officer, I turned to the police, raising my voice by 3 points, with a touch of righteous anger, Ms. Sarah entered a private residence without factual basis, conducting personal attacks and defaming my name. If you do not warn and record this, I reserve the right to sue her for defamation of character and intentional harm. The officer's expression darkened, and he sternly said to Sarah, Ms. Sarah, please calm down. The evidence shows Ms. Elena is not involved in this case. If you continue your irrational rudeness and obstruct the police, we will take compulsory measures against you according to the law. Just then, Mark's phone suddenly vibrated violently. He answered the call, listened for a moment, and his face instantly turned paler than a corpse, nearly dropping the phone to the floor. What? Found it? At the St. Mary Hospital Rescue Center? Mark's voice trembled violently. Sarah lunged forward to grab Mark's arm. What happened? How's Chloe? Mark swallowed, his eyes filled with despair and fear, and spoke tremulously. The rescue team found her in the shrubs at the bottom of the cliff. She had broken her neck and ribs, head severely injured. The doctor said she's still breathing, but in a severe traumatic brain injury, turning into an unconscious vegetable person. A vegetable person? Sarah, upon hearing those 3 words, was struck as if by lightning. Her legs went weak, and she collapsed to the floor, letting out a shrill, unbearable wail. I looked down on Sarah, collapsed on the ground, and Mark, whose face is full of despair, with not the slightest trace of sympathy, only a cold pleasure. In the previous life, they forced me into desperation in the same way, making my parents and me suffer. In this life, the traps they dug themselves would eventually swallow their own daughter. Chloe did not wait for a scapegoat to be used against her. During the long, hopeless rainy night, she bore all the pain of the fall by herself. Officer, I said calmly to the 2 policemen, since there is a lead on the missing person, please go to the hospital to investigate as soon as possible. I also hope the police can find out why a young girl would run alone to the cliff edge on a rainy night. The officer nodded, helped Sarah up from the ground, and the group clumsily left my home. Chloe has become a vegetable. This news hit like a bolt from the blue, shattering Sarah's family's life. In the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital, various machines buzzed and whirred. Chloe lay on the bed, her head wrapped in bandages, a breathing tube in her mouth and nose, her eyes tightly closed, no longer the smug, calculating look she used to have. And the ICU costs, thousands of dollars per day, along with the expenses for drugs that keep the brain active, were like a bottomless sinkholes, greedily devouring the family's already scarce savings. On the 3rd day after the storm, Sarah and Mark knocked on the door again. This time they were not arrogant as before, but carried a near-morbid persistence and moral coercion. In the coffee shop, Sarah's eyes were swollen like peaches, gripping my mother's hand, crying with heart-rending pain, "Aunt, Chloe is the niece you watched grow up. Now she's lying in the hospital, no different from a dead body, and the daily medical fees are in the thousands. We've emptied our savings already. Isn't your old downtown house sitting there empty? Can you transfer it to us as collateral for a loan? When Chloe is better, we'll definitely repay it." My mom softened at the sight of Sarah's misery, a hint of hesitation in her eyes, then she looked at me. I gracefully took a sip of coffee, set the cup down, the porcelain clinking crisply. "Aunt," I said coldly, interrupting her sobs, "my cousin had an accident, which we regret. But it was an accident, not caused by us. My parents' house is meant to be my marriage asset in the future, the ownership is in my name. On what basis do you think you can use my house to fill your family's bottomless pit?" Mark's expression darkened, lowering his voice to threaten, "Elena, you can't be so cold-blooded. If it hadn't been for you turning off the power, Chloe would have been lying at the cliff bottom all night missing the best rescue time. In the end, you're responsible too. If you don't give money, we'll go to your workplace and make a scene for the whole society to see how cruel you are. Go ahead." I lifted my eyes, calmly looking at him. In a former life. Oh no, that morning, the police had already completed the full statement, confirming I bore no fault. "If you go to my workplace to make trouble, I will immediately sue you for extortion and creating a disturbance. By the way, I will apply to have your remaining property frozen by the court." Mark's cold, petrifying gaze fixed on him, his throat feeling as if choked, and he couldn't utter a word. If I didn't do this, Sarah and her family would fall into extreme financial despair. And this was precisely the trap I had prepared. I knew that although Mark appeared honest, he was a compulsive gambler. In the previous life, he had spent a lot of money at underground casinos behind Sarah's back, and only by later siphoning off my family's assets did he cover the debt. Now, faced with enormous medical expenses, he urgently needed a chance to get rich overnight. 2 weeks later, an opportunity fell into Mark's hands by chance. My college classmate Eric, actually a financial advisor I secretly hired at great expense, posing as a major client of a venture capital firm, took the initiative to contact the money-hungry Mark. In a private room at a high-end club, Eric, with a rosy smile, poured Mark a whiskey. "Mark, how much money can you really make in real economy? The hospital is pressing for payment every day, and your meager salary won't save your daughter. I now have an internal short-term arbitrage project. As long as you invest the principal, there's a guaranteed minimum return of 30% in a week. See these bank statements? I just settled a $500,000 deal last night." Mark stared at the huge transfer receipt on the desk, his eyes almost bulging out, his breathing becoming incredibly rapid. Is this safe? It can't be a scam, right?" Mark swallowed, tentatively asking. "A scam?" Eric scoffed, standing up to take the documents. "Believe it or not. If it weren't for Elena's face, you wouldn't be in line for this kind of guaranteed, risk-free internal credit anyway." As soon as he heard my name, Mark's last trace of caution vanished in an instant. In his eyes, I was a recently graduated, naive young girl who could never possibly orchestrate such a scheme. In the first week, Mark withdrew the family's remaining $30,000 to test the waters. 3 days later, Eric indeed transferred back to him a high return of 4%, principal plus interest. After tasting the sweetness, Mark went completely mad. By the 3rd week, in order to obtain higher returns to pay Chloe's increasingly expensive special care fees, under Eric's covert inducement, Mark lied to Sarah, not only mortgaging their own home to a high-interest lender, borrowing as much as $2 million, but also secretly embezzling funds from his own company. He placed all his bets into Eric's custom-made high-risk underground leverage scheme. That night, I sat in my room, watching the real-time fund flow report on the computer screen. On the screen, all the funds Mark deposited, after passing through more than a dozen offshore accounts through legal transfers, flowed into the overseas trust fund I had prepared in advance. I looked at the astronomical number in the account balance, gently swaying the wineglass in my hand. At this moment, Mark was still immersed in the fantasy of becoming a millionaire, completely unaware that he had already dragged himself and the whole family into an abyss from which there was no return. This was only the first step. The contract he signed when taking out the high-interest loan carries compounding interest, with an annual rate as high as 36%, and the mortgage is Sarah's only house. With no house, no savings. And carrying the charges of huge high-interest debt and embezzlement, Sarah's family's collapse would be faster and more thorough than in the previous life. The night outside was as ink-black as lacquer. I watched the loan shark's reminder messages coming to my phone, and a cold smile twisted the corner of my mouth. Before the nightmare of usury collection arrived, Sarah took the lead and launched her desperate counterattack. Perhaps driven by some grim force, in her moment of despair she made the same choice as in the previous life, attempting to use public opinion to completely ruin me, forcing me and my parents to pay for our safety. One early morning, a carefully edited video quickly exploded on local social networks and major short video platforms. In the video, Sarah is kneeling in front of St. Mary's Hospital, crying hoarse and beating her chest in anguish. She holds up a photo of Chloe lying in a hospital bed with tubes, and facing the camera she condemns with bloodthirsty words, "Everyone, judge for me. My dear cousin Elena has a heart as cruel as a venomous snake. My daughter Chloe was tricked to the outskirts cliff during a stormy night. She made countless distress calls. She not only did not save her, but coldly turned off her phone. My daughter ended up a vegetable, and she is wasting the whole family's life-saving money without even bothering to look at her. Such a person with a beastly heart, everyone must see her true face." Below the video are screenshots of Chloe's call logs from that night and hospital footage that has been pixelated. Under the incitement of the hired online mobs and unsuspecting netizens, public opinion instantly tilted in one direction: anger. Oh my God, so terrifying, how can there be such a cold-blooded person? Not even saving my cousin, phone off while others become a vegetable, this is premeditated murder, right? Dox her. Have her fired from her job. Force her whole family to leave the area. In just a few hours, my phone was flooded with harassing calls and vicious messages. Some extreme netizens even came to my building to splash red paint and write blood letters. My parents, seeing the vile banners outside, trembled all over, eyes red and swollen. "Elena, what should we do? Should we give her some money to have them delete the video?" My mother pleaded through sobs. "Mom, not a cent." I calmly poured her a glass of warm water while gracefully drying the glass. If she wants to drown me in public opinion, I'll ride this wind and push her into the depths. I didn't choose to argue with the online mob or post a rebuttal. I let the public opinion ferment for 2 full days, until the topic stormy night caused cousin to become a vegetable rose to first on the local hot search, with major mainstream media requesting interviews. On the afternoon of the 3rd day at 2 o'clock, I held a public press conference at the largest press hall in the city center, funded myself. The venue was packed. Cameras and live feeds from dozens of media outlets were all aimed at the podium. Sarah and Mark had also insinuated themselves as relatives of the victims in the back row, their eyes flashing with smug venom, waiting to see me cry on camera and publicly apologize. I wore a plain black suit, my expression calm as I walked to the podium. Thank you to all the media for coming. My voice was crisp, resounding through the hall via the microphone. Regarding the recent accusations made by Ms. Sarah on the internet against me, I am here today to respond comprehensively. The reporters in the audience raised their cameras, flashes everywhere. First, I pressed the remote. And the big screen immediately displayed the official investigation findings and the notice of no filing issued by the public security authorities. This is the authoritative conclusion issued after I cooperated with the investigation. It clearly states that last night I stayed at home the entire time reviewing, and there are time-synced system logs certified by the timekeeping center and room surveillance that can be checked. I did not have any possible time to commit any crime, and I bear no legal or administrative responsibility for Ms. Chloe's fall. A wave of commotion rippled through the hall as reporters began to discuss in hushed voices. The Sarah in the back row, seeing this, suddenly stood up and screamed, "Stop playing these official words to whitewash things. The police can't manage morality. You turning off your phone is you choosing to do nothing in the face of death. Your conscience has been eaten by a dog." Facing Sarah's rebuke, I did not get angry. Instead, I flashed a thought-provoking smile. "Aunt, since you mention morality and the truth, why don't we take a look at why Chloe insisted on calling me at 11:45 that night?" I pressed the remote again. From the broadcast speakers, an extremely clear audio recording suddenly played. It was a recording from a week before Chloe fell off a cliff, made in a cafe with friends, a truth I only discovered after my death in the previous life, and in this life, I had long arranged for a detective to retrieve and notarize this cloud backup in advance. In the recording, Chloe's sweet voice carried a nauseating sharpness. At that time I'll trick Elena into driving to Blackstone Mountain alone, I'll pull the rope at the edge of the cliff and pretend to fall. As long as she comes. My mother will be secretly filmed at the scene to prove that she pushed me. Then their multi-million-dollar house and all their savings will all belong to us. Even if she jumps into the Yellow River, she won't be able to clear her name. When the recording finished, the entire press conference hall fell silent. All the reporters' eyes widened, and the camera lenses locked onto Sarah in the back row, whose complexion had gone pale and who trembled all over. I looked coldly at Sarah in the crowd, who looked like a rat in the street, and dropped a second heavy bomb. The large screen switched to a page containing a notarized certificate issued by an authoritative forensic institution. This is a scanned private diary written by Ms. Chloe before her fall, and encrypted memos from her phone. My voice was as cold as a polar glacier. It details, in great detail, how she and Ms. Sarah and Mr. Mark planned this cliff trap from beginning to end. They had originally planned to make me the scapegoat. They didn't expect that night I started my phone's timed shutdown because I was studying for exams. The truth is, Ms. Chloe, in effect, moved a stone only to crush her own foot. When she was preparing to stage a self-directed act at the cliff, a heavy rain caused a landslide, and she accidentally slid off the edge. And her own mother, Sarah, to create the scene of being victimized, didn't even call an ambulance immediately, but waited at the foot of the mountain for a whole hour to intercept someone who didn't even exist, the me who never existed. Boom! The press conference erupted in complete chaos. My God! There really are such vicious mother-daughter pairs in the world. To scheme to seize relatives' inheritance by staging a frame-up, only to end up as a vegetable yourself. That's what you deserve. The barrage of comments in the live stream instantly reversed, flooding Sarah's social accounts with insults like a tsunami. Sarah slumped in her chair, facing the barrage of reporters closing in with questions and accusations. Her face turned ashen, she covered her head with her hands, and like a mad beast, she screamed and dashed out of the press hall. The live broadcast of the press conference on the whole network shredded Sarah's last dignity and veil of modesty. Sarah, who originally relied on playing the pity card to gain sympathy, overnight transformed into a poisonous woman to be ridiculed by everyone. The online vitriol overwhelmed her account like a tsunami, and angry netizens hurled rotten eggs and trash at her doorstep every day. She could no longer ask anyone for donations, and faced a civil complaint formally filed by our legal team, claims for enormous damages to reputation and mental anguish. However, for Sarah's family, this was only the beginning of the nightmare. After losing the trump card of public opinion, Mark's high-interest loan debt finally spiraled out of control. That evening, just as Sarah had returned home in a daze from the hospital, she found the iron gate at home painted with the ominous words "Pay back." 4 or 5 burly men with full-back tattoos blocked the doorway, holding a mortgage contract and loan notes bearing Mark's signature and fingerprint. You. What are you doing? I don't know you guys. Sarah backed away in fear. The scar-faced leader grabbed Sarah by the collar and slammed her against the wall, his voice cold. Don't know us? Your husband Mark used this house as collateral to borrow $2 million from our company, plus interest, making a total of $3 million. Today either you pay up or move out. This house is already our company's property. Sarah was struck like by lightning, screaming, $3 million? Impossible! Where did he get the nerve to borrow so much? You're scammers! At that moment, Mark, dressed in a tattered suit and reeking of alcohol, was dragged over by 2 strong men like a dog, and flung heavily to the floor. Mark's face was pale, his nose swollen, grabbing Sarah's legs and crying, "Wife! I've lost all of it. Eric, that con man, ran off, and we've lost all our money. You animal!" Sarah raged, pounding Mark as the entire corridor filled with despairing fights and cries. The loan sharks showed no mercy. They dumped the furniture onto the street, forcibly changed the locks, and swept Sarah and Mark out of the house. Homeless on the streets, Sarah and Mark had only one last lifeline, the enormous commercial personal accident insurance policy that Chloe had been purchased by Sarah years earlier. In Sarah's view, Chloe had become an unconscious vegetable now, meeting the Grade 1 disability payout condition in the policy. Once the claim was approved, there would be a full $3 million, enough not only to pay off part of the debt but also to cover Chloe's medical expenses. The next morning, carrying the yellowed policy, Sarah hobbled to the insurance company claims hall. "Process the claim. Now. My daughter has fallen into a vegetative state. The terms require full payment of $3 million. Sarah slammed the documents on the counter, eyes red as blood. The claims officer entered the policy number into the computer, and after a few seconds, the officer's expression became subtle, slowly raising his head. "Sorry, Ms. Sarah, the claim for this policy has been legally frozen by the courts, and we cannot process the payout." "Frozen? On what basis?" Sarah pounded the counter, shouting, "That's my daughter's life-saving money." The claims officer turned the computer screen toward her. "According to the records, the notes receivable and claim collateral rights of the insurer that holds this policy have been legally acquired last week by a private fund named Shingen Capital. At the same time, considering that the policyholder Mr. Mark is involved in major commercial fraud and asset transfer cases, the police and creditors have jointly applied for asset preservation. Until the case is settled, any related insurance payouts are strictly prohibited from being withdrawn." Shingen Capital? Who owns that company? Why freeze my money? Sarah screamed hysterically. Just then, the glass doors of the claims hall were pushed open. I wore a sharp white trench coat and stepped in with high heels, accompanied by a legal assistant. The heel taps echoed crisply and rhythmically on the marble floor. Sarah's eyes widened as she pointed at me, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Elena. Is that you? That Shingen Capital. Is it yours?" I paused 3 steps away from her, looking down at her from a higher vantage, my expression calm and unmoved. "Aunt, you have a good memory." I smiled and accepted a debt acquisition agreement from the assistant. "All the debts from Mark's embezzlement of public funds and underground lending have been wholly acquired by me. In other words, what your husband owes now is not just high-interest loans, but also this $3 million debt of mine." You demon!" Sarah trembled violently with anger, about to pounce. "You've driven Chloe to death with a forced buy debt situation, and now you're going to push our whole family to the edge of despair." A bodyguard stepped forward, coldly separating Sarah. I gently brushed the dust off my coat, lowered my voice, and spoke slowly in a tone that only the two of us could hear. "Desperation? Not even close, Aunt. In the previous life, did you ever think about your own today when you forced my parents to sell their house to pay off debts and watched me be driven to death by online harassment?" Sarah understood the meaning in my words, her pupils quickly narrowing to pinpoints, a wave of indescribable fear flashing in her eyes. What are you talking about?" "About a previous life." I did not answer her question, only turned gracefully, leaving her a ruthlessly cold silhouette. By the way, one more reminder, the special nursing ward at St. Maria Hospital is due for renewal today. If you don't renew within half an hour, Chloe will be immediately moved out of the intensive care area and into a regular corridor with no nursing care equipment. From the claims hall behind me, Sarah's heart-wrenching, almost hopeless wails echoed. In the early morning, the Criminal Investigation Division meeting room at the police station was so cold that the air seemed to freeze. I sat on one side of the long table, a cup of hot water steaming in front of me. Opposite, the captain of the criminal police team wore a grave expression and pushed several high-definition photos and the latest forensic report before me. "Ms. Elena, thank you for the additional clues you provided." The officer pointed to a break in the photo. According to the clues you provided, we retrieved remnants of the protective railing at the top of Blackstone Mountain's cliff and re-examined them using the latest high-precision microscratch testing technology. In the photo, the ferrule lock of the metal mesh originally used for anti-slip and safety at the cliff edge displayed an exceptionally smooth metal cut. This is by no means a natural break caused by heavy rain, nor is it a landslide collapse. The officer's voice was heavy. The lock was cut by a professional hydraulic cutter by hand. Moreover, in the bark below the break, we found traces of oil. By component analysis, it is a kind of industrial lubricant, smeared on the broken rope and handrail, greatly accelerating the fall. I looked at the photo calmly, showing no surprise. In my previous life, this forged sign of destruction had been bought off by Sarah and her family and forced onto me when I rushed to the scene in the middle of the night for rescue. In this life, since I never stepped foot on Blackstone Mountain, the scene preserved the original evidence intact. Officer, were any DNA or fingerprints found on the oil or the cutting tools? I asked softly. Yes. The officer turned to the next page of the report, his tone icy and piercing. On a discarded plastic bottle at the scene that had once contained lubricant, we recovered a complete fingerprint. After database comparison, it belongs to Mr. Mark. Additionally, we unearthed a pair of mud-covered boots buried in the soft soil at the cliff top. The mud on the sole matches exactly a pair in Mark's shoe cabinet. The truth was torn open at this moment, exposing the most hideous disguise. The so-called Cousin's Night of Heavy Rain mishap was never a self-directed or improvised drama by Chloe, let alone an accidental fall. The truth is, Mark and Sarah, a pair of merciless, murderous spouses, had already insured Chloe for a huge personal accident payout long before, and when faced with enormous debt, they turned to murder. They not only attempted to frame me and seize our family property, but also knowingly pushed their own biological daughter Chloe into the abyss, fabricating an illusion that I had murdered or that she had fallen by accident, so they could comfortably cash in the $300,000 insurance payout. Chloe probably never knew that the night she was preparing to trap me at the cliff, her beloved father Mark had already secretly cut off all her way out and smeared deadly lubricant on the handrail. Officer, I slowly raised my head, my eyes calm but carrying an invisible pressure. This means it is a premeditated murder case. And the victim is their own daughter. The originally planned scapegoat was me. The officer nodded heavily. Yes, the evidence chain is extremely complete. This is not a simple accidental fall. It is a malicious family murder and fraud case. We have formally filed the case for intentional homicide, attempted, and insurance fraud. Half an hour later, the police split into two directions. One group went to a dilapidated rental to arrest Mark, and the other headed straight for St. Mary's Hospital. I followed the police car to St. Mary's Hospital's ordinary ward floor. The corridor's air was foul, and voices were loud. Because they couldn't afford the expensive intensive care charges, Chloe had already been forcibly moved out of the independent sterile ward and lay on a shabby bed in the innermost part of the corridor. Sarah sat by the bed, her eyes blank as she stared at the unconscious Chloe, mumbling something under her breath. Tap, tap. The heavy, stern footsteps echoed down the corridor. Several police officers in uniform stopped in front of Sarah's bed. Miss Sarah, Mr. Mark. The officers produced the arrest warrant, their voices echoing through the corridor. According to the latest investigation results and on-site evidence, you are suspected of deliberately damaging security facilities on the evening of October 14th on Blackstone Mountain, and deliberately murdering Miss Chloe to fraudulently obtain a huge insurance payout. You are now being lawfully detained. The gleaming handcuffs glinted menacingly under the dim corridor lights. Led by the police, Mark instantly collapsed to the floor, the stench of urine and filth filling the air. And Sarah, as if her soul had been sucked out, fixed her gaze on me who had just arrived, her lips quivering violently, and she could not even cry out loud. Patients and family members in the corridor crowded around, pointing and cursing at this pair of despicable animals. In the interrogation room of the criminal police unit, the heavy iron door slammed shut. In the face of overwhelmingly complete physical evidence and fingerprint analysis, Mark's psychological defenses collapsed within less than 3 hours. This cowardly and greedy man, on the interrogation chair, cried and confessed every crime in full detail. He admitted how he was driven into a dead end by usury, how he conspired with Sarah to cash out Chloe through an accidental life insurance policy, and how on that stormy night he went up the mountain early to saw through the barbed wire and smear a high-concentration industrial lubricant. However, the case handling hit a critical procedural snag, because Sarah refused to admit the mastermind's identity, and her bail review application was submitted by her defense attorney on the grounds that she needed to take care of an extremely ill relative. The court, according to interim regulations, allowed Sarah a 3-day temporary bail under electronic ankle monitoring to deal with Chloe's follow-up care. This brief window of freedom became the soil for Sarah's frenzied death throes. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the ordinary ward of St. Mary's Hospital lay in darkness. Due to arrears, Chloe's bed had been pushed to the end of the hallway beside a storage closet. There was no ventilation here, and the surroundings were piled with discarded medical instruments and nauseating sanitizing buckets. On the bed, Chloe still lay like a corpse, the ventilator emitting a dry, mechanical wheeze. Sarah, wearing a wrinkled, tattered coat, dragged her ankles with electronic ankle straps, limping through the ward area. Her eyes were bloodshot, her eye sockets deeply sunken, and she exuded a nauseating mix of despair and ferocity. Mark had already been formally arrested, the usury company had seized all her property, and online scorn and invective had driven everyone away as if they were avoiding a plague. She had nothing left. The only thing that could save her was that insurance payout of $300,000. And according to the insurance terms, if the victim dies of injuries during the investigation and it cannot be directly proven that the accident was caused by the policyholder, the insurance claim process would automatically trigger the maximum accidental death payout, and the payout would enter the estate distribution process as a forced inheritance. In other words, as long as Chloe stopped breathing completely now, she could get the money and run away abroad. Sarah slowly walked to Chloe's bedside, looking down on her own biological daughter with disdain. "Chloe, don't blame Mommy." Sarah's voice was hoarse as sandpaper, tremulous with illness. "As you are now, living is suffering. Since you've become a vegetable, you might as well help Mommy one last time. As long as you die, Mommy will get that money." There was not a shred of maternal warmth in her eyes, only madness twisted by greed and fear. Sarah pulled a small transparent plastic bottle from her pocket and a disposable syringe. The bottle contained a high-concentration potassium chloride injection she had procured at a steep price through illegal channels. If she injects this into Chloe's intravenous line, within seconds the heart will stop beating due to electrolyte imbalance, and it will be difficult to distinguish it from heart failure in a routine autopsy. Trembling hands, she pierces the bottle's seal with the needle and slowly draws the cold liquid into the syringe. The bubbles pop gently, and the needle tip glints with a chilling gleam in the dim light. Sarah stepped forward, reached out, and grabbed the 4-line hanging by Chloe's bed, aiming the needle at the medication port. "Die. Just die already." Her facial muscles twitched violently, teeth gritted as she plunged the needle in, thumb slamming down on the syringe's plunger. Crash! The closed wooden door of the storage closet was violently thrown open by an enormous external force. The blinding beam of a powerful flashlight instantly pierced the darkness of the hospital room, shining directly on Sarah's utterly terrified face. "Freeze! Police!" Several plainclothes officers who had been lying in ambush rushed into the room like tigers pouncing on prey. The leading officer seized Sarah's wrist and forcefully twisted it in a joint lock. "Ah!" Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream, and the syringe fell from her hand, shattering on the ground. The clear potassium chloride solution splattered everywhere, exuding the scent of death. Before she could react, 2 female officers had already pinned her firmly to the ground, and the cold, heavy handcuffs clicked shut, fitting snugly around her wrists. Just as Sarah was being pressed against the floor, her face against the cold, grimy tiles, a pair of elegant high heels slowly stopped in front of her. I stepped out from behind the officers, looking down at her from above. In my hand was a professional device recording in 4K ultra-high definition, the screen clearly replaying the entire sequence of Sarah raising the syringe, attempting to murder her own daughter. You've been watching here all along?" Sarah's bloodshot eyes widened, and a beast-like roar of despair escaped her throat. From the moment you applied for bail pending trial, I knew what you intended to do. I crouched down, leaning close to her ear, my voice extremely soft, yet every word pierced her soul like an ice needle. In the last life, you drove me to a dead end for money. In this life, you're willing to kill your own daughter for money. Sarah, did you think there were no eyes in the hospital room? I pointed to the hidden micro-camera above the hospital room. It was a high-definition real-time surveillance camera I had installed at my own expense on the day Chloe was transferred to the general ward, connected via cloud to the criminal investigation team's monitoring terminal at the Public Security Bureau. Attempted murder of one's own daughter, caught in the act, with ironclad evidence. I slowly stood up, looking down at Sarah as the police dragged her out like a lifeless dog. This time, even if the King of Heaven himself comes, you won't set foot outside a prison cell. Elena! You devil! You won't die a good death. Sarah's hysterical wails echoed down the empty hospital corridor, sounding utterly harrowing. The inevitable arrest in a criminal case merely severs Sarah and Mark's physical freedom. What follows is a complete cleansing of their business and financial affairs. I want them to witness, even behind high walls, the thorough liquidation of the meager assets I've spent half a lifetime painstakingly building, and all secret plots and loopholes being burned to ash. On the fourth day after the police issued the criminal arrest warrant, I, together with the legal team and top auditors, strode into the executive office where Mark used to work. In the past few years, Mark had leveraged the convenience of family business alliances and commercial dealings to privately accept enormous kickbacks, and in the last life, through forged company seals and fictitious procurement contracts, had siphoned off nearly a third of the equity and working capital of my parents' companies. The reason my parents went bankrupt and died in despair in the last life was largely because Mark had hollowed out the company's finances behind their backs. And in this life, I will not leave him the slightest room to escape punishment or concealment of assets. Ms. Elena, this is the complete audit report we have compiled after 3 days and nights of pulling bank, business interconnected data and offshore account traces. The chief auditor handed me a stack of documents hundreds of pages thick. I opened the report, and the data were shocking. Over the past 3 years, Mark had embezzled more than $4 million in a loophole created by 3 shell companies registered in the Virgin Islands, which not only included usurious debt but also 2 hidden properties transferred to a distant relative of Sarah and a large trust fund on the eve of a storm. He thought moving the assets to distant relatives would make him untouchable. I sneered, the cold light in my eyes revealing endless chill. Immediately apply for pretrial property preservation with the courts on charges of malicious transfer of assets involved in the case, property and commercial fraud, sealing all 2 properties, the trust fund, and all related accounts. Understood. The legal department has prepared all litigation materials and will submit them to the court for urgent processing within 10 minutes. An hour later, the court's freezing and sealing orders were officially issued. Mark's last escape route for Sarah had been completely cut off. Moreover, due to the exceptionally large amount of embezzled funds, involving commercial bribery and misappropriation of duties, the company's board held an emergency meeting overnight and decided to bring him to public prosecution, demanding full compensation and the maximum criminal liability. Sarah's family, deprived of all financial support, had fallen into absolute bankruptcy. With no funds coming in, the finance department of St. Maria Hospital officially halted Chloe's premium neuroactive medications and top-tier nursing services in accordance with policy. At noon, I walked through the noisy corridors of the ordinary ward block of the hospital. Once surrounded by numerous devices, Chloe had now been moved out of the high-level care ward and placed in a free palliative care room on the basement level. The air here carried the musty smell of old pipes and the sharp odor of cheap disinfectant. The ceiling's fluorescent tubes emitted a cold yellow light, occasionally crackling with power outages. Without the expensive brain activity-maintaining drugs, Chloe's face took on a deathly pale gray, and her body appeared gaunt and emaciated from muscle atrophy. I stood by the bed, hands in my coat pockets, looking down from above at this cousin who had once stood so high, full of provocation and calculation. In the last life, she lay in an upscale ward, clinging to the meager scraps of blood and flesh that I fed on to survive, while Sarah wielded our family's money to lobby for online harassment all around the world. In this life, she can only lie in this underground, sunless infirmary, rotting slowly like a withered weed. Feeling desperate, Chloe? I bent down, pressed close to her ear, and spoke in a voice so soft that only the two of us could hear. Your father, for embezzlement and attempted murder, will serve at least 20 years in prison. Your mother, for poisoning and murdering you, faces a life sentence. And you? You barely have any basic nutrient solution left to sustain you. 1 month later, the first instance court. The courtroom atmosphere was solemn and majestic, and the national emblem radiated an inviolable glow above the judge's bench. The spectator stands were crowded with reporters from major media and members of the public, and everyone's gaze focused on the defendant's bench. There were 2 defendants on trial, Mark and Sarah. However, in just a few months, the 2 had long lost their former swagger and decency. Mark wore gray prison clothes, most of his hair had turned white, and his posture was stooped. Sarah's face was withered, her eyes sunken deep in their sockets, her mental state nearly collapsed. Witness Elena to testify. The judge struck the gavel. I, dressed in a well-tailored black suit, walked calmly to the witness stand. Sitting opposite me, Mark and Sarah glared with a mixture of intense hatred and unhidden fear the moment they saw me. The prosecutor began to read the indictment, each heavy charge echoing through the courtroom: attempted murder, insurance fraud, commercial fraud, embezzlement in office, and malicious defamation. Defendant Mark, regarding the charges brought by the public prosecution, that on a stormy night on October 14 you went to Blackstone Mountain in advance, used hydraulic shears to destroy the protective rail, and smeared industrial lubricants in an attempt to create the illusion of a fall off a cliff to fraudulently obtain a large insurance payout. Do you admit the facts? The judge asked harshly. Mark trembled, hastily looked up, and pointed at Sarah beside him, shouting hoarsely, Your Honor! I'm innocent. All of this was ordered by Sarah. She said the family owed a lot of high-interest debt, that Chloe bought a huge accidental insurance, and as long as she pushed her off, she could get $3 million. She also told me to wipe the incision clean and frame Elena. I was merely following her orders, the mastermind is her. You're full of nonsense. Mark, you heartless brute. The Sarah beside him, upon hearing Mark shift all the blame onto her, went mad with fury and pounced on Mark, swinging her handcuffed fists at his face. Obviously you owe usury debt from gambling. You forced me to find a solution. You cut the rope and oiled it. Do you expect me to take the blame for you now? May you rot in hell. The court became chaotic, and the bailiffs quickly rushed up to pin the 2 back into their seats, as they tore at each other with vicious curses. The gavel struck heavily. Silence. Maintain court orderly. I sat at the witness stand, coldly observing this most ugly dog-eat-dog scene. In the previous life, the 2 of them collaborated to pin the crimes on me, sharing the profits from devouring our family assets. In this life, confronted with ironclad punishment, their so-called mutual interest alliance was as fragile as a sheet of paper, exposing the most primitive, dirty selfishness. Witness Elena, please present the supplementary evidentiary chain you have submitted. The judge looked at me. I stood calmly and began to present the exhibits to the panel and the entire audience. The first piece is a notarized audio recording from a professional appraisal agency, clearly documenting Sarah and Mark's pre-incident plot to lure me to the cliff's rim as a scapegoat. The second piece is a complete funds tracking diagram showing Mark's embezzlement flowing into loan sharks, and the loan agreements he signed at an underground casino. The third piece is a high-definition video recorded by hospital room surveillance, which fully reconstructs how, during Chloe's period on bail, Sarah aimed a highly concentrated potassium chloride injector at Chloe's intravenous line. The evidence is conclusive, each link tight, forming a flawless, dead logic closed loop. The prosecutor, in a loud and passionate delivery of the prosecution opinion, stated, the 2 defendants, being the biological parents of the victim, solely due to greed and debt pressure, shamelessly planned their own daughter's accidental death, and even after the plan was exposed, attempted to frame innocent relatives. They even attempted to poison and silence witnesses in the hospital. Their method of crime is extremely cruel, their subjective malice is profound, and they have seriously trampled on ethics, morality, and the bottom line of the law. After a long 3 hours of trial and deliberation by the panel, the judge returned to the bench, and the court rose to its feet. This court rules, defendant Mark is guilty of intentional homicide, attempted, insurance fraud, and embezzlement in office. Multiple offenses punished cumulatively, sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, deprivation of political rights for 5 years, and confiscation of all personal property. Defendant Sarah is guilty of intentional homicide, attempted, insurance fraud, and defamation. Multiple offenses punished cumulatively, sentenced to life imprisonment, deprivation of political rights for life. With the hammer fall, the verdict was deafening. The moment the gavel struck, Mark collapsed to the floor, his face ashen. Sarah let out a shrill scream, then rolled her eyes and completely fainted at the defendant's bench. The court security officers dragged these two despicable criminals, who had deserved their fate, out of the courtroom like mud. 3 months after the verdict, the early winter wind swept through the streets, lifting dead leaves. In a hospice on the outskirts of the city, the dim, damp second-floor ward was still filled with the sharp smell of disinfectant and mold. Because there was a lack of expensive special care funds and medications to maintain brain activity, Chloe's body had already undergone irreversible, severe decline. Yet perhaps a cruel joke of fate, after months of coma, some of the brain hemorrhage had miraculously absorbed. She woke up. But this awakening was more despairing than death itself. Her lower body was completely paralyzed, her arm muscles severely atrophied and clenched into her chest like talons, and her entire face severely twisted due to nerve damage. She could not utter any clear syllables. She could only make a faint cluck sound from deep in her throat, with nothing but her bloodshot, cloudy eyes still conscious and moving. That afternoon, the ward's iron door was pushed open. I wore a sharp, black wool coat and slowly walked to her bedside. High heels clicked on the damp tiles. Hearing the footsteps, Chloe's distorted head turned toward me with difficulty. When her gaze focused on my face, those cloudy eyes erupted with extreme fear, hatred, and pleas. Her lips convulsed violently, a rough breath rattling in her throat as if she wanted to scream, to question, but could only drool in revulsion. I walked to the bed, picked up the notarized court document on the table, and pressed it gently against her chest. Chloe, can you understand what I'm saying, right? I bent down, close to her ear, my voice soft as if reminiscing, yet with a chilling coldness. Chloe's pupils dilated violently. I know you have a lot of questions in your heart. I brushed the wrinkles from my coat and sat gracefully in the chair by the bed. You want to know where your parents are, don't you? I took out my phone and opened a video. It was from a few days ago, a surveillance clip from inside the high wall. In the footage, Mark wore gray prison clothes and kept stepping on the treadle at the sewing machine day and night. His back had become completely stooped from long, strenuous labor, his eyes numb with despair. In another frame, Sarah was washing filthy clothes by hand in the prison laundry, her skin raw and oozing with infection, once fond of beauty but now all the hair white and her face pallid. Your dad got 20 years. Your mom got a life sentence. My voice was extremely calm. Do you think your father went to the cliff that night to save you? No, he cut the safety rope early and coated the railing with industrial lubricant. They bought you $3 million in life insurance for accidents. From the start, they planned for you to die on that stormy night. Hearing this, Chloe's eyes widened to the extreme, her eye sockets nearly splitting. Tears trickled from the corners of her eyes, mixing with saliva to soak the worn pillow, and her whole body trembled violently. And, I continued to reveal the cruelest truth, while you lay in a special care ward, your dear mother, after she got bail, did not first try to gather funds for your medical bills. Instead, she took an injection filled with high-concentration potassium chloride and sneaked into your ward, intending to finish your breath herself and claim the insurance money. If the police hadn't set up surveillance in the shadows, you would have been poisoned by your own mother 3 months earlier. G.U.H. G.U.H. Ah. Chloe's throat let out a heart-wrenching scream, the sound of faith collapsing and kinship turning toxic into extreme despair. Her eyes nearly bulged from their sockets, and she convulsed on the bed, yet she did not even have the strength to scratch the sheets. As for the assets you care about most, I smiled and drew closer to her cheek. All of your family's properties, deposits, and shares have been legally acquired and seized by me. The bed you're lying on now, the cheap nutrient injections you receive every day, they are all consuming your last scrap of bankruptcy relief. In a week, you won't even be able to keep this basement bed. I slowly stood up, looking down from a height at Chloe, who was on the verge of collapse in despair and remorse. In the previous life, she lay in a high-end intensive care unit, watching my family fall to ruin and taking pleasure in devouring my family's assets to stay barely afloat. In this life, I will make her face the consequences with full awareness, right here in these endless dark and stench, as she watches how she and her family are erased piece by piece. Live well, Chloe. I adjusted my collar and turned away. In silent despair, slowly learn the evil fruits you and your parents sowed with your own hands. In the room behind me, Chloe let out a despairing cry that she could not voice, a sound rebounding off the cold basement walls and lingering for a long time. The winter snowflakes fluttered down from the sky, covering the city's noisy traces with a blanket of pure white. Inside the high walls, the cold commands of the guards shattered the morning silence. Sarah wore a huge, bulky prisoner's uniform, dragging legs that throbbed with pain from long-term hard labor and dampness, numb as she shuffled along the passage to the labor camp workshop. Her hair had already turned as white as frost, her once sharpened, calculating face now sunken, and her eyes did not hold any glimmer of humanity. In the neighboring prison, Mark was bent over, pushing a waste cart weighing hundreds of kilograms, his spine cracking with ache. The grip of high-interest debt bankruptcy, the judgments for commercial crimes, and a 20-year iron-barred life had thoroughly stripped him down to a machine-like laboring wreck. The two of them, separated by a tall wall and barbed wire, were near yet could never meet. In the long, endless life ahead, all that awaited them was day after day of regret, physical ruin, and the endless torment of watching their biological daughter turn on them in self-destruction. And in the dim, damp underground palliative care ward on the outskirts of the city, Chloe was completely cut off from all expensive maintenance medications as the last bit of bankruptcy relief funds dried up. In that snowy, stormy night, Chloe slowly closed her eyes, filled with remorse, in the extreme cold, despair, and excruciating physical pain. She never uttered another clear syllable before death, nor did she receive her parents' redemption. In the silent, odor-filled darkness, she ended her own evil and absurd life. As the last spark of malice dissipated, all the past shadows and nightmares were utterly reduced to ashes blown away by the wind. The next morning, on the top floor of the city center's corporate headquarters, the sun pierced through the clean, bright floor-to-ceiling windows, flooding the spacious, elegant CEO's office. I stood at the towering window, looking down over the bustling, prosperous city. The financial statements on the desk showed that all family assets previously extorted and embezzled by Mark had been fully recovered, and the group's equity had been recentered in our family's hands. In the new round of business planning, the company's market value doubled, not only completely freeing us from the fate of the previous bankruptcy and collapse but also heralding an unprecedented thriving new life. Ding! The door was gently pushed open. Mom carried a platter of freshly cut fruit and walked in, wearing a long-awaited, heartfelt warm smile on her face. "Elena, don't always work. Take a break for a while. Your dad just called and said he'll cook your favorite dish at home tonight." I turned around, smiling as I took the fruit tray from my mother. "Okay, Mom, I'll finish this last document on my desk, and we'll head home early tonight." Seeing my parents' rosy, healthy faces and the light rekindling in their eyes, my heart felt calm and content. The blood feud and inhuman torment of my last life, in this life, through calm, decisive, and thorough counterattack, finally came to the most perfect close. I didn't resort to any extrajudicial measures. I merely used the most objective real-world logic, the calmest evidentiary deployment, and the iron hammer of the law to let the greedy reap what they sow, and the wicked walk into a dead end. I walked to the desk, pressed the power button on my phone, and set the screen to a sunny desktop background. Outside, the snow gradually stopped, a ray of brilliant sunlight pierced through the clouds, and shone straight onto me. Warm and fierce. My new life has just begun.